I'm Tom Hauser. Here's what's ahead today on At Issue.
Now we're protecting freedom in the Middle East, protecting American interests in the Middle East. If we wanted oil, we would buy it.
Political issues get a lot of play at the state fair, although some criticize some tactics as unfair. Also ahead, we'll reveal what the former head of the Minnesota National Guard wants kept quiet. Plus, a lot to talk about involving the University of Minnesota, including tuition hikes, the possibility of strike, and some stadium conflicts. The president of the University of Minnesota will be one of my guests. Plus, you'll get political analysis from former Ventura Communications Director John Woodley and political science professor Steve Smith. Plus, Jason Lewis and Ember Reichgott-Young, as always, face off. It's a big day for one of them. We'll explain why. See it all this morning on At Issue.
From Eyewitness News, this is At Issue with Tom Hauser. A closer look at how issues affect you and your community, and how world events affect Minnesota. Political analysis, in-depth coverage, and debate on the week's hot topics. At Issue with Tom Hauser begins now.
Details of the investigation pertaining to the former head of Minnesota's National Guard will remain sealed, at least for a while. On Friday, a Ramsey County judge extended his restraining order. Eugene Andreotti recently retired as head of the Minnesota National Guard amid state and federal investigations into his conduct while in office. Andreotti argues that releasing information about one investigation will have a negative impact on the other. Despite the judge's ruling, Eyewitness News has learned of the nature of the investigations.
I am going to speak from the heart.
Andreotti was Minnesota's top National Guard commander for 15 years. Now, 4 sources tell Eyewitness News the federal investigation done by the Inspector General of the Air Force is primarily looking into financial issues, including trips that Andreotti took alone and with his family, using the state's Beech King Air turboprop plane. Misappropriation of funds. It's believed Andreotti directed money approved for one purpose to be used for another. And misuse of military equipment, like painting this Humvee non-regulation colors. Sources also tell Eyewitness News the state investigation primarily involves allegations of sexual harassment and/or sexual discrimination. That investigation has gone on for months. Governor Pawlenty wanted to make the state findings public. That's why Andreotti sued. Andreotti's attorney declined to comment about our story. All of the parties in this case remain under a gag order. Well, this is the first Sunday of a big annual political event. Yes, the Minnesota State Fair. And we were just hours into the great Minnesota get-together when we witnessed the first strike in the political war games. Republicans handing out what they called DFL lies on a stick right in front of the DFL party building.
Right now we're protecting freedom in the Middle East, protecting American interests in the Middle East. If we wanted oil, we would buy it, buddy.
Suddenly, the Great Minnesota Get-Together became the Great Minnesota Yell at Each Other.
Check your facts and stop.
So what sparked this political brouhaha? It wasn't fair food on a stick indigestion.
State fair time. Get your DFL lie on a stick.
But it was on a stick. DFL lies on a stick, handed out by Republican Party operatives outside the DFL booth.
A lot of the people are reading them. They're reading them and they're seeing the actual DFL lies on a stick.
Could they be more childish? I mean, this is grade school, schoolyard stuff.
The so-called lies range from a Senator Mark Dayton statement about Iraq to former President Clinton denying he had sex with Monica Lewinsky.
The Republicans are digging anything up that they can possibly dig up, whether it's old quotes or old issues. Let's talk about the future of the state of Minnesota.
For now, it did give state fairgoers a chance to be part of their own sideshow.
Propaganda. Oh, come on.
The DFL party didn't take long to fire back. The chair of the party, Mike Erlandson, says he's considering starting a recall effort against Republican Governor Tim Pawlenty. And on Friday, the party began an online petition drive in an effort to force Governor Pawlenty to release his tax returns and other personal financial information. They did that out at the state fair. They want him to disclose whether he paid taxes and Social Security on $60,000 he was paid by a telecom company while he was running for office. The Green Party is joining the political probe of Governor Pawlenty's business ties and campaign contributions. The party filed complaints with state campaign regulators and county attorneys over money Pawlenty earned while actively campaigning.
On this issue. It's a very serious issue, and we believe by pursuing this action, we will be able to help grassroots democracy by ensuring that the process is clean.
And Governor Pawlenty says he welcomes, quote, a thoughtful and fair review by the Campaign Finance Board and the county attorneys. The governor also was at the state fair, reiterating his view that the probes are pure politics. He made his way through the crowd to get to the WCCO radio booth for his weekly Friday broadcast.
Well, good morning to Good Morning Minnesota. This is Governor Tim Pawlenty broadcasting live from the Minnesota State Fair. We come at you every Friday morning.
Governor Pawlenty just returned this week from the National Conference of Governors meeting in Indianapolis. Cab drivers want Governor Pawlenty and the state to help protect them. This past week, they came to the state capitol in a convoy that started in South Minneapolis and traveled along Interstate 94. 2 Somali cab drivers have recently been shot to death in Minneapolis. Since the governor was out of town, Public Safety Commissioner Rich Stanek, a former Minneapolis police official, was there to hear their concerns.
It's very dangerous. I'm not calling this job only person to call very dangerous. The government knows nationwide this is a dangerous job.
Whether they be bulletproof glass, whether it be GPS or global position satellite equipment, whether it be some type of video cameras in the cabs themselves. And I will take this back to my agency and look for both federal and state funds.
However, Stanek said he's not certain any specific funds are available for improving the safety of cab drivers. Now an update on the activities of Minnesota's U.S. Senators. Democrat Mark Dayton is pushing hard for a prescription drug plan. He has a booth at the state fair where people can sign a petition to get the plan passed, including Dayton's provision saying that Congress will get only the same benefits as the people in the final prescription drug bill. He does expect a fight.
The House, and I hope we'll take it up right after we get back and pass it. But it'll be another all-out battle where the pharmaceutical industry, which is a very powerful lobby, will be doing everything it can to defeat it.
Minnesota's other U.S. Senator, Republican Norm Coleman, is on a tour of Africa right now with a congressional delegation. The senators are seeing how U.S. financial aid might be used best to fight AIDS. He spoke to us by phone Friday from Cape Town, South Africa.
There are 11 million orphans now in South Africa. There are also 5 million people with AIDS right now, HIV positive, and yet only 20,000 are on the antiviral treatments, which is, tells you that they've got a long, long way to go.
That delegation is led by Majority Leader Bill Frist, a Tennessee Republican who is also a medical doctor. President Bush has pledged to spend $15 billion to fight AIDS in Africa and in Caribbean countries. Coleman has a personal connection to the AIDS issue. His sister Kathy died of the disease about 10 years ago. A new health program here in Minnesota might become a national model that could save lives. It's a Minnesota marvel. Doctors, nurses, and hospital administrators talking openly about medical mistakes that sometimes kill patients. They did it this week at Methodist Hospital in St. Louis Park.
Healthcare today is not as safe as it could and should be.
That's a bold statement to make just a few feet from a hospital where patients are receiving care. But as Governor Pawlenty signed a new law that will make reporting of medical mistakes mandatory, he said bold moves are necessary.
When you have the number and types of incidents, adverse incidents occurring in our healthcare delivery system, turning away from it and hoping it doesn't recur is not a good plan.
The new law requires reporting of 27 specific medical mistakes, or so-called adverse healthcare events. They include surgery performed on the wrong patient or body part, a foreign object like a surgical instrument left in a patient, or a patient death due to medication error.
I have to live with this the rest of my life.
It would include cases like Linda McDougall's, the woman who ended up on national news after mistakenly having both breasts removed at a Twin Cities hospital.
It was instant shock. I couldn't even react to it.
The goal of the new law isn't just to get a better handle on the number of medical mistakes, but also to learn from those mistakes so they don't happen again. The new reporting system will be fully implemented in about 2 years. By then, information about medical mistakes will be posted on the Minnesota Department of Health website. Accident investigators say South Dakota's only congressman, Republican Bill Janklow, made a fatal mistake. The report says it looks like Janklow ran a stop sign going 70 to 75 miles an hour when a Minnesota motorcyclist crashed into Janklow's Cadillac and died. The motorcyclist didn't have a stop sign at that intersection. The South Dakota State Patrol says they're handling this case just like any other fatal accident.
We go in and investigate them and let the facts and the evidence do our speaking and just try to deal with the extra distractions the best we can.
The motorcyclist was 55-year-old Randy Scott of Hardwick, Minnesota. Hundreds of his friends and family gathered at his funeral this past week. Janklow's driving record is also drawing attention. He was warned he could lose his license as far back as 1979. He was warned again in 1982. And from 1990 to 1994, he had 12 speeding tickets. Janklow's driving record also indicates he's had 7 car accidents in the past 10 years. Janklow served 4 terms as governor of South Dakota before going to Congress. If convicted, he could go to jail. Humorist Al Franken, formerly of Minnesota, just released his new book, Ripping Republicans. The book is titled Lies and the Lying Liars Who Tell Them, A Fair and Balanced Look at the Right. Fox News is suing Franken, saying the network trademarked the words fair and balanced. Fox's plan might have backfired, though, since all the attention is pushing the book to the bestseller list. In the book, Franken cites as an example the Republican reaction to the Wellstone Memorial last October, where Wellstone's best friend, Rick Kahn, was quite emotional.
We are going to win this election for Paul Wellstone. We are going to win this election for Paul Wellstone.
The Democrats crossed the line last night when their memorial service for Senator Wellstone turned into a get out the vote rally for the November 5th election.
And again, that all happened last October. Franken writes now, some people were moved, but the right saw an opening. They took moments out of context, lied about the rest, and used it as a political club to attack the Democrats. In its lawsuit, Fox News calls Franken, quote, shrill and unstable, and claims his views, quote, lack any serious depth or insight. About 1,300 U of M employees could strike soon. Members of Teamsters Local 320 voted overwhelmingly to authorize a strike. The majority of them work at the main campus in Minneapolis, and reporter Andy Skugman has that story.
I've been here for 18 and a half years.
For nearly 2 decades, Rose Fairbanks has cleaned university buildings, but at a custodian's top pay of $16 an hour, she's not cleaning up.
I live paycheck to paycheck.
The union, which represents Fairbanks and the 1,300 other Teamsters, says the university is proposing to make her paycheck even smaller.
I'd say right now we're pretty far apart.
Local union head Sue Morin says the university's plan to freeze workers' wages and increase their health insurance costs essentially amounts to a pay cut.
We've got people making $25,000 to $30,000 a year, 3% of their salary for health insurance costs. They're going to be choosing between paying their electricity bill and taking health insurance.
The university declined an on-camera interview, but one official said the school's hopeful an agreement can be reached next week at mediation before students return for fall semester September 2nd. The university says a Teamsters strike would not affect day-to-day operations. Rose Fairbanks disagrees, saying their hard work would be hard to replace.
Oh, I think they would see quite a bit of difference if we weren't here.
Also, a union which represents 1,800 clerical workers is set to take a strike vote this coming week. It's possible approximately 3,300 U employees could be on the picket line in a matter of weeks unless a resolution is reached. We'll talk next with the president of the University of Minnesota, Robert Bruninks, about jobs and budget cuts and other issues, including tuition hikes, and later a look at some of the Arnold Schwarzenegger ads running on television out in California. Plus, we try to shed some light on the blackout. 2 experts on electrical power join us later to talk about the system's weaknesses and what can be done to improve it. I think most of you recognize that. It's the Minnesota Rouser in honor of our guest, U of M President Robert Bruninks, who's kind enough to join us today to talk about all kinds of things going on at the U as another academic year approaches. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Bruninks.
It's a pleasure to be here, Tom.
Now, let's start with the story we just saw a couple of minutes ago about the possibility of a labor strike at the University of Minnesota. How critical is that issue right now, and what's the likelihood of getting that settled before students come back here in a week or two?
Well, it's obviously a critical issue. This is a tough year for the University of Minnesota. We're asking our employees to take wage and salary freezes and to share more in the cost of increased health care, insurance cost, and we're asking our students to pay much more this year. So it is a serious issue. We have every sense of optimism that we can solve this. We really value our employees. The University of Minnesota is a great employer, and we're going to work really hard with our employee groups to resolve this issue. I want to assure parents and others that business will be conducted in the normal fashion at the University of Minnesota, regardless what happens. We have plans to make sure that classes are offered and offered on time, and that the normal functions of the university will go on a daily basis.
And how would you do that? I mean, with all these hundreds or thousands of people.
You have to have contingency plans, and our people have worked to develop plans. Some people will just have to put in more hours to make sure things work, and we'll have to find ways to keep the normal functions and operations of the university going, but we intend to do so.
That would be workers, I assume, who are non-union workers who wouldn't be impacted by this.
That's right. But I have every hope that we'll be able to resolve these issues.
There have been some issues. I know one state representative has talked about wanting an investigation of some of the salaries paid to some of the non-union employees at the U of M, many of whom make more money than you do, the top man at the University of Minnesota. Yeah. Is that much of an issue? Is that, especially with all the budget difficulties at the university?
Well, I don't think it's much of an issue. All of our people are taking a salary or wage freeze this year. And we regularly benchmark all of our salaries against local as well as national and in some cases international salaries. And our people generally are paid in the lowest 1/3 of the top 30 research universities in the United States on the Twin Cities campus. And so our people are not overpaid when we do salary comparisons with other appropriate employee groups. We think they're fairly compensated for the most part, but they're not overpaid, and I think Minnesota citizens can rest assured that we take these issues very, very seriously.
Obviously, your most important mission is educating students, and that education is getting more expensive, isn't it, every year, especially with all the budget cuts from the state. What are the final numbers now on what the tuition increases are for this year and next year, and how is that impacting the ability of students to afford the university?
Well, the Twin Cities campus undergraduate rates will go up approximately 14.5%. They'll be roughly 13% next year if the board approves the proposal I plan to submit to them next spring. And that is a big hike, and there's little question that our students are paying more than I think is desirable. But if you translate that into dollars, the average undergraduate student will see his or her tuition increase about $800. Tuition is still very affordable on all the campuses of the University of Minnesota, and what I remind parents and students is that higher education is not only affordable today, but it's the best single investment you can make in your future. We're taking extraordinary action to make sure we cushion the tuition increases for our low and moderate income students. We're working very, very hard to put more scholarship and need-based aid on the table. And so we have every intention of keeping higher education accessible and affordable to students in Minnesota and others who come to study with us.
And if I recall my budget math accurately, I think while the state was cutting back on higher education funding, were they putting a little more money into student financial aid?
The state did put several $1 million more, roughly I think $30 million more into student grants, particularly for low-income students. And they made other efforts to try to cushion this impact on higher education. But higher education took a real blow in this legislative session, and we had to cut nearly $200 million in state support at the University of Minnesota over this next 2-year period. So it was a very challenging situation, but we didn't ask our students to pay a disproportionate part of the budget reduction. Their part of it was approximately 43%. More than half of the balancing of the budget occurred through budget reductions or deferred expenditures.
couple of stadium-related questions for you. Anything new on the efforts to build a football stadium on campus, with or without the Minnesota Vikings?
Well, we're going to obviously explore this issue. We tried to work something out with the Vikings. They didn't feel it was the right economic model for them, and it's probably not the right economic model for the University of Minnesota. Our fans, our friends, the friends of the university really have a high degree of interest in bringing Gopher football back to campus. I think we can do it. But first and foremost, we're an academic institution, and we have to do it in a way that supports our academic mission. I don't want to compromise academic programs of the University of Minnesota to build a stadium. But I actually think we can get this done over the next several years, and we can find a way to do it in a manner to save the state some money.
And in all likelihood, without the Vikings?
I think it's probably going to be a separate stadium, a collegiate stadium, and it'll be on the Twin Cities campus.
Last couple of quick things. There's a conflict, potentially, if the Minnesota Twins win the American League Central Division and end up in the playoffs, of there being conflicts with, I think it's 2 University of Minnesota football games.
Michigan State and University of Michigan games.
And they're balking at moving those games to Friday night to accommodate the Gophers, because you won't have the stadium available if the Twins are in the playoffs. Is that any closer to resolution?
We're working on it. I spoke with one of the presidents today. I'm going to speak with another one yet this afternoon. We're working with the league to try to get this resolved. I'd still like to get it resolved with the networks. I'm delighted for the Twins. I think this is a great outcome, to see this kind of progress and to see us in this tightly contested race. But it is a real problem for us. Even if we succeed in moving it to Friday evening, we're likely to lose gate receipts and revenue, which is very costly to our budget at this time. But we think we're going to get it resolved, and I have every hope we'll see a resolution in the next week or so.
And finally, this show airing on Sunday is also the same day as Maroon and Gold Day at the State Fair. Where can folks find the U of M booth out?
Well, they need to go to Dog Patch or
Dan Patch.
Dan Patch Avenue.
Stay out of the Dog Patch.
Yeah, Dog Patch. I'm usually in the dog house.
Yeah.
But anyway, they need to come to the University of Minnesota booth, our building. We have wonderful displays. We'll have the University Marching Band at the head of a parade at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There are prizes. Famous Dave's is sponsoring food coupons and other prizes. And so I think people will find not only very interesting academic work and exciting discoveries from the University of Minnesota, but they'll have a lot of fun at the State Fair if they visit any of our venues.
All right, sounds like a fun Sunday ahead for University of Minnesota fans.
Please come to the fair.
All right, Dr. Brunix, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
By the way, if you go to the fair, stop by and see the Channel 5 building as well. Our building is on Chambers Street between Carnes and Dan Patch, as we were just talking about. Just look for our TV tower with the big 5 on it. You can't miss it. Well, former Ventura Communications Director John Woodley and political science professor Steve Smith join me next for some political analysis. And later, I'll show you an exclusive interview I did with Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was here for Governor Ventura's inauguration. It's very interesting. It's part of our time travel. Plus, the blackout blues. How susceptible is our power grid to failure? It's not an election year for most Minnesota politicians, so it didn't seem like the State Fair would see much political action this year. Wrong. As you saw earlier, Republicans and Democrats just moved their political battleground from the state capitol to the land of pronto pups and reptile shows. When Republicans started handing out DFL lies on a stick, we knew we'd find our quotes of the week.
Most of the time you like to see the politics at the Minnesota State Fair be not so much nonpartisan politics, but be positive politics. You know, and the Republicans have chosen to be negative. They've chosen to stage a protest on the first day of the Minnesota State Fair.
Politics is a bigger part of the State Fair is pronto puffs and corn dogs. And right now we think that the DFL party is out in Minnesota spreading a lot of misinformation and quite honestly lies. And we thought that this was an appropriate venue to really inform the public of that.
Well, that all happened on Thursday, the first day of the fair. Things got even more interesting on Friday. And here to talk about that and other things, Steve Smith, political analyst, and former Jesse Ventura Communications Director John Woodley. Thanks for standing in today for Governor Anderson.
My pleasure.
On Friday, we learned that the DFL party, they weren't going to bother with walking around with little DFL lies on a stick. No, they were going to go right for the jugular. And they're talking about a California style, that's the quote, style recall of Governor Pawlenty. You've studied this law a little bit. What are the chances of that actually happening, given the set of circumstances?
Well, the Minnesota law is not a California-style law. In California, the idea is that if there's a popular uprising, you can have the petition signed and you can get your recall. Here, it's a legal process. Only 25 people sign a petition to initiate this process. It goes to the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice decides whether or not there are any legal grounds. And the legal grounds are pretty well defined. There has to be malfeasance or nonfeasance while in office, or you have to be convicted while in office of a crime that occurred earlier. And so there's a high standard, and those standards have to be met before the Chief Justice lets this proceed. If it proceeds, then there's a public hearing with the special master who has to agree that there are grounds. And then if there are grounds, it has to go back to the full Supreme Court, which has to vote. And then, and only then, does it get on the ballot. It has nothing to do with a popular uprising.
And don't forget, you also have to get, as John, we're going to talk in a moment about when you went through this with Governor Ventura, but then if it gets through all of that, they still have to get signatures on a petition equivalent to 25% of the number of people who voted in the last election, which would be about 560,000 signatures.
A lot of signatures.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, you went through this, John, as a member of the Ventura administration. That's only right. Time, this law has only been in effect since 96, but in 99, I believe it was, there was a recall action brought against Governor Ventura. It didn't go anywhere other than that 25 signature stage, $100, and the Chief Justice swatted it down. What do you recall from that, and how do you compare that to this effort?
It was a nuisance. It was a one-day story, and then maybe a follow-up a couple of weeks later when it was put to rest. Not going to happen. Steve just told you how it has to happen if it's going to happen. This law was written by legislators in one of their more thoughtful periods. It's a very good law. It makes it difficult, and it ought to be difficult to recall someone. Someone has to commit a crime that makes a difference, so that the people are very much aware that they are not performing their office in a way that you would expect them to. That's not happening here. It doesn't generally happen. They're not going to be successful. It is a waste of time. It is a bunch of political tomfoolery.
So has this gotten to the point, though, where because of what's going on in California, every time, whether it be any constitutional officer or Supreme Court justice, any of these people can be recalled under this law, are they just going to try to hold this over people's heads and say, we're going to try to recall you? Is it just more political mudslinging more than anything else?
Well, I think the recall action will be something we hear people talking about in American politics now for a few years. I don't think it'll last, but it'll be here for a few years.
Interesting. My good friend Joel Lockhart, the former spokesperson for President Clinton, you know what he's doing right now? He is organizing an effort to recall President Bush.
Well, and our own former Senator Dean Barkley is actively campaigning for one of the candidates who actually hopes to win the California governorship if the recall there should be successful. So this is a major, California politics, of course, is a major political industry, and the recall has expanded that industry many-fold.
The final thing, the next time we go to the polls in here in 2004, 2006, how much is this just going to poison the well in terms of people even turning out to vote? And it seems like it's back to 98 when Ventura was swept into office.
Back in the old days, what the Democrats and Republicans would do at the state fair is they'd bring the people of stature within their party to meet the people. The Hubert Humphreys, the Eugene McCarthys, the Stassens and the Andersons would be out there shaking hands and talking about the crops and talking about the new machinery that's on Machinery Hill. What is this nonsense of lies on a stick and these stupid arguments? Get back to some sort of thoughtful discourse here in the name of politics.
And we've heard virtually nothing from legislative leaders, from the governor's office. They should step in and tell their political hacks to stop it. Right. They ought to grow up. Maybe some group counseling is what they need.
Yes, maybe.
With Jesse Ventura as the facilitator. How about that?
I want to cover that. John Woodley, thanks for standing in today for Governor Anderson. Steve Smith, as always, thank you. We'll have more discussion later when Jason Lewis and Emma Rice Scott Young face off. Maybe they'll be nice to each other for once, since one of them has a birthday. We'll tell you which one. They're turning 50. Up next, time travel with me, and you'll hear Arnold Schwarzenegger say some interesting things back in 1999 that might have foretold his run for California governor. And after the Northeast blackouts, a lot of us wonder how sturdy the electrical grid really is. I'll have two guests with some shocking information. Okay, not so shocking, but you get it. Sorry, I was powerless to resist that fun. We'll be back. California TV stations are not running Arnold Schwarzenegger movies these days. They're worried the other candidates for governor will demand equal time. So that means the only glimpse of Arnold Californians will get on TV are his new campaign ads.
I want to be the people's governor. I will work honestly, without fear or favor, to do what is right for all Californians.
This is just one of his ads. The latest polls show Schwarzenegger leading the race with a narrow edge over Democratic Lieutenant Governor Cruz Bustamante. Former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura is so far sitting this campaign out. He's neither endorsing or campaigning for Arnold Schwarzenegger, even though Ventura is quite popular in California. That does seem strange given the fact Schwarzenegger was a big booster of Ventura's. Here he is in the governor's office giving Ventura a bronze eagle that Ventura kept on his desk for 4 years. In our time travel segment today, here's what Schwarzenegger told me about Ventura and politics during a live interview at Ventura's inauguration in 1999. Honored guests here, about 112 people will be sitting here in the rotunda. Among them, this man, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who we of course all know from movies and television. You are close friends with the governor-elect, aren't you? Tell me about your relationship.
Well, Jesse and I have been friends since the mid-'80s. We have since then done 3 films together, Predator, Running Man, and Batman. In all 3 of those films, he has contributed a lot as an actor. He's very talented in acting, and we will miss him in this next 4 years because he will not be part of us. But I got to know him very well. We became very good friends, and he's a terrific man. He's unlike anything else.
Obviously, you've enjoyed working with him in the movies. What do you think Minnesotans can expect of Jesse Ventura, the governor?
Well, I think, first of all, he's a very disciplined man. And I think that is one thing that politics needs right now is a lot of discipline, because it's going really insane in this country. And I think it's somewhat embarrassing of how people, the 2 parties are fighting in Washington all the time. And it only hurts the people in this country. I think Jesse is unlike that. I think that Jesse only thinks about the people. He doesn't care about the infighting and all those things, the politicking. That's why he did not want to be a Democrat or a Republican. He wanted to be independent. He wanted to work together with both of the parties. And ever since I've known him, he always expressed tremendous interest in the ultimate goal of being a civil servant, helping people, serve the people in his state or in his city. He did not have a plan early on what it should be. And so he's very dedicated, and it's a great teamwork. Terry, his wife, is a very dedicated woman, and they're a great family. They believe in family values, in education, in schools, and all those kind of things. So I think both of them are going to bring a lot to the state.
Now, obviously, Minnesota in the middle of January is not the place to be, especially you Hollywood types. You think enough of him, though, to come here in the dead of winter to see him get sworn in. That must be a real special honor for him.
Well, for the real man, the cold weather means nothing. What means a lot to us, and to me especially, and to my family, is to celebrate with Jesse and Terry here today. This is a very special day because his dream became a reality, and as he said many times, he wanted to see if the American dream is still alive. I, of course, could have told him that many years ago. He doesn't have to run for governor to find that out, because I noticed since the last 30 years I've been in this country, I've realized that the American dream is alive, and anyone that is willing to work can make it in this country. It's the most fantastic country in the world. I've been all over the place. So I'm excited that Jesse is the governor. I told him already I will do anything that I can to bring films here to help the economy of this state and all those kind of things, and to help him in any other way. I love him.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, you've been very gracious with your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy your stay in Minnesota.
Thank you.
That's the way it was back in 1999. And speaking of Jesse Ventura, just where does his new show on MSNBC stand? Well, ever since he announced on The Tonight Show way back on June 11th that he would have a show on MSNBC, not much has happened, not publicly anyway. A set for his show was built in St. Paul, the public television studios, and they've done many rehearsals, but still there's nothing on the air. It was announced last week he'll have a one-day-a-week show on Saturdays rather than a daily weekday show. But for the past 2 or 3 weeks, rehearsals have stopped completely, and the show remains in limbo. What should be done to prevent Minnesota and Wisconsin from having a major power blackout? We have a couple of people with expert opinions on the electrical grid and how to improve its reliability. That's coming up next. The investigation into the Northeast blackouts is still underway. The latest is that several transmission lines in Ohio were carrying more electricity than usual, in fact, much more. The power outage darkened homes and businesses in 8 states and parts of Canada, affecting 50 million people. It shut down more than 100 power plants and knocked Cleveland's water supply offline. With all of that as a backdrop, today I have 2 experts in energy with me to talk about the fragility of the grid system, not just out east, but also here in the Midwest. Jay Drake Hamilton is a scientist with Minnesotans for an Energy Efficient Economy, also known as ME3.
Good to see you, Tom.
A little shorter there, isn't it, Jay?
Much shorter.
And Audrey Zibelman is from TransLink Transmission, a company just started a couple of years ago. It includes Xcel Energy and other major utilities in the upper Midwest. And Audrey, I want to start with you. The question on everybody's mind is, what are the chances of something happening here in the Midwest similar to what happened out in the East and in Canada?
Tom, there's always a chance that we can have a blackout on the grid anywhere in the United States at any time, and that's only because the grid is vulnerable to different types of lightning strikes, generation outages, etc. So there's always that risk. Now the question is it a significant risk? In Minnesota and in this region we have a fairly strong grid. We have utilities who are quite experienced in managing it. But with that said, clearly in this part of the country as well as the rest of the country, the grid needs additional investment, and we need to be cautious about how we plan and invest in it because the economy and the public are so dependent on the grid for their daily lives, just as we found out last week.
And speaking of that, Jay, your organization is interested in building a cleaner and more efficient electrical system. And how do you go about doing that? Because by doing so, I imagine you could reduce the likelihood of events like this happening.
That's exactly right, Tom. Minnesotans for an Energy Efficient Economy is after a clean, fair, and efficient energy system. And what we're looking at in Minnesota is a system that for a long time has run on large centralized power plants in remote areas of Minnesota and in other states, and long-distance transmission to get the power to us. We're after a system that has more local control and cleaner technologies. If you look at the generation units making up our grid, 75% of them are coal and 17% are nuclear power. So we'd like something that is a lot more diverse with sources of generation closer to where people need them. We believe that this will be a more stable grid. On top of that, we also need energy efficiency measures because that will cap the growth in demand and literally lighten the load on those transmission lines.
Audrey, in your reaction to groups like Jay's that work on these, are you in lockstep or do you butt heads on some of these issues because you both sounds like have the same goal but maybe different ideas how to do this?
Well, I agree with Jay, and we need to have a balance on all 3 things. When I look at the energy grid and all the issues that confront us in energy, there are several things we need to think about. We need to think about how do we keep the system itself extremely reliable because we're dependent upon it all the time. We need to think about how we keep the cost down because after all, electricity is fundamental to the economy and people depend upon it both for their jobs and their livelihood as well as their individual comfort. And in the country, we have an exceedingly increased demand on the grid as we electrify. Everybody has computers and wireless and all sorts of things that are demanding additional electrical resources. So it's important to keep it cost effective. And thirdly, if we want to develop certain technologies like wind energy, those technologies tend to be further away from the load centers. And in order for the renewable energies like wind to get developed, we actually need to develop the grid so that we can transport that energy to the consumers, just like when we used to have farmers had to we depend upon rail. Wind farmers really depend upon the grid. So it's a complex issue. What we need to do and all the time, and I think we agree on this, it's a balance. It's a balance of the environment, it's a balance of reliability, and it's a balance of cost. And that's the policy that we need to try to develop.
All right, Jay, we're running out of time, but final word on this. I know you look at kind of the macro situation here in terms of the grid, but what can people do at home just to maybe reduce their dependence on electricity and the amount they use?
Whenever you need to buy a new appliance, buy an Energy Star rated appliance from the federal government. EnergyStar.gov has excellent advice. Especially refrigerators, washing machines use the most power.
All right, EnergyStar.gov.
That's correct.
There's a great simple little piece of advice that I think you could both agree might be a good idea for everyone to do. Jay, I appreciate it. Audrey, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Up next, Ember Reichgott-Young and Jason Lewis face off. See if they can get along when one of them is having a landmark birthday.
Over in Iraq, do you remember this guy? We remember the cards? Yeah, thanks. That's Chemical Ali. According to intelligence sources, we killed him a few months ago. Well, yesterday we captured him. And tomorrow, I'm sure we'll be hot on this trail again.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
We recorded Jason Lewis singing in the shower today as he rehearsed singing happy birthday to his cohort here on Face Off, Ember Reichgott-Young, who turns how old?
Landmark, apparently, 50.
50.
5-0.
Well, congratulations to you for surviving this long, especially sitting next to him for about 3 years.
You know, I've always felt, Jason, that you should respect your elders.
Well, look, in another 10 years, I'll be there, Ember.
I don't think so. He's coming
I believe that was a dig, Ember. Well, you know, for your birthday, the DFL is trying to recall the Republican governor. Is this a gift they've wrapped up for you? Is that how this works?
Well, since I was the author of the recall, maybe it is. But, you know, I think they've actually got a real point here. The grounds that we have for recall are very narrow. And if Governor Pawlenty has done some wrongdoing, there would be an appropriate vehicle to go on. Here's what I think would be interesting. They should have a hearing and force Governor Pawlenty to reveal his tax returns. That would be a very good thing for the people of Minnesota to have an objective hearing with the court master.
Boy, that's setting a whole new standard for politicians. Making them, should we make them all release their tax returns and their medical records? I seem to recall a recent president who refused to release his medical records, and certainly we have an interest in knowing how healthy our presidents are. I mean, this is grasping at straws. Now, I think the Pawlenty response, as I've heard it so far anyway, is right on. It says, you know, if you want to try to get 535,000 signatures for recall, go ahead. But Ember, I'm glad to welcome you on your 50th birthday to the recall movement nationwide.
Well,
I figured we could convince you.
I know you're trying to be so nice. But no, I actually agree with you, and I'll be nice back. I agree that not everybody should have to disclose their tax returns. But when they're called into question, like they are with Governor Pawlenty, I think he should reveal them so that he can clear his name.
Well,
He's
do you
come
have any
forward
evidence
in the
that
past.
do you have any evidence that the IRS is investigating, that anybody else is contemplating charges other than these political witch hunts?
But the problem is, if what he did on his campaign disclosure form was a mistake, we'll find that out by looking at his tax return. There's no way that he can reveal his tax return without some inconsistency. It's going to raise some questions. And that's something the public needs to know. Just how serious a problem
the public doesn't
was
care
there.
about BAMCO and these political witch hunts. I'm telling you, if you want to start a recall, be my guest. Go ahead. You won't get anywhere close to 500,000 signatures. It'll be a flop, and this is merely a political act of desperation on behalf of Gray Davis in California.
And Ember, you authored the law back in 1996, so answer this. We talked about it a little bit earlier. How much of this activity had to take place in the performance of his duties in office? Isn't that one of the thresholds, one of the standards here? And all of this stuff seemed to happen before he was elected.
Well, it's serious malfeasance or nonfeasance. In other words, did he fail to disclose something? Is there a conflict of interest? All of those things affect him in current office.
But if he failed to disclose it while he was running, he wasn't sworn into office.
I think you could have a pattern of conduct, things that have built on. But the question is, if he didn't pay his taxes, that's wrongdoing that I think the public needs to know about, and then we can make a decision.
He didn't report his income? That was
We
my
don't
point.
know, but that's why isn't he telling us?
The IRS has his return. And there's absolutely been nobody coming forward. Look, there have been a couple of complaints filed with the Disclosure Board, the Green Party on behalf of the Democrats, moving forward, and you're ready to jump the gun before the investigation even starts. This is the epitome of a political witch hunt, and it's transparent, Ember.
Wanted to get to one other topic. Down in Alabama, the brouhaha there is not about a recall effort. It is about the Ten Commandments and whether or not a monument to the Ten Commandments should be removed from, what is it, a courthouse there?
Yeah, well, inside the judicial building.
Inside the judicial building. Your take on that?
Well, look, we've got to get away from this notion that the Establishment Clause means you can't reference religion, acknowledge religion, or even promote religion. What it means is you can't establish religion, mandate religion. There's also something called the Free Exercise Clause in there that means the government can't discriminate against religion. All I'm going to say is this. If they're going to remove the monuments out of the judicial building in Alabama, you better take that carved monument out of the Supreme Court building that has Moses holding the Ten Commandments in it.
Jason, what happened to you, Jason Lewis, the defender of our great Constitution?
Yes.
The Constitution says you separate the church and state.
No, that was a letter from Jefferson to a constituent.
But the bottom line is you've got his 8 associate justices unanimously saying it needs to be removed.
Well.
And here's what I think the problem is.
Yeah.
This is an example of someone from the far right,
Right.
the kind of person President Bush wants to select
No.
for the United States
Hold
Supreme
on
Court.
a second.
Now
we
we
gotta wrap
can
this up
see
so we can
why
absolutely
there's a
interesting
problem.
political twist to this. The exact opposite is true. Bill Pryor, the Attorney General, is coming down hard on Moore because he's the guy trying to get the nomination. Just the opposite of what you said.
That was the last word on this because we got to celebrate the birthday.
Steve
Smith is here.
Happy birthday.
He brought in some bubbly and a candle. The fire marshal wouldn't let us put a cake out here with all 50
Thank you.
candles on it, so we just did the one.
It's Steve. Can't we all just get along?
Apple juice for Sunday morning. Yes, that's right.
Disability in politics. All right.
Happy 50th birthday.
You bet.
Up next, an encounter between the governor and the spelling bee champ. Stay tuned. Governor Tim Pawlenty met his match this week, a boy from Detroit Lakes.
Spell prestidigitation?
I can, but
You
you want
can?
me to?
Really?
Yeah.
I don't want to put you on the spot now. Do you know how to do it?
P-R-E-S.
Governor Pawlenty challenged Grant Remen, the state spelling bee champ. He did spell that word correctly, by the way. Grant did not disappoint him. He even got a high five when he said he was more comfortable meeting with a Republican governor than he was when he last visited a governor named Jesse Ventura. No comment. That's all the time we have for now. We'll see you back here again next week for another edition of At Issue.